Hello, Gaia. How are you?
Oh, I'm having a phenomenal day. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me about your senior thesis that when did you finish your senior thesis? Was it 2 years ago now?
Yeah, it's been quite a while. I wanted to say it's good to be back in the developmental lab, as you were saying.
Yeah. So, but you worked with me on, I supervised your senior thesis. So I know a lot about your senior thesis, and plus you also um, um, presented some of the results at various conferences. So I'm familiar with your senior thesis, and I want to talk about your senior thesis specifically, particularly because it's you use content analysis, and in my class I teach my students this method of content analysis. So I think it would be nice for me and you to kind of talk a little bit about your study, about your senior thesis, and the method of of content analysis. So your senior thesis was about video games, correct?
Yes, it was very much about video games.
And what was the question that you wanted to investigate?
We asked two questions. The first one was, were there moral themes in video games? Because that was something that no one had ever done before. And number two was, if there are moral themes, what are the changes of moral themes over time in video game franchises? So we looked at that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So because you were investigating video games, I guess it was the methodology asked for content analysis of the content of video games, correct?
Right.
And what was the sample? I guess in again in my um, in this in in content analysis, one of the things you have to decide is on what is the unit of sampling, or the essentially what will be your sample in your study. So what was the sample or unit of sampling in your study?
So the unit of sample of my study is 20 best-selling first-person shooter video game franchises of all time, and also it was the ones that are the most popular and the best-selling. So it's just like it had a high rating, and it's just like how much did it sell for it to be like the greatest video game franchises. Yep.
Right. And you actually, what did you use to do the analysis? You used YouTube videos, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. They were just right there, free for everyone to just watch and see. And I was just like, this looks interesting. Let's go do that.
So they were publicly available. So the unit of sampling were the actual, not necessarily the actual video games per se, but the YouTube, what they call walkthroughs. Is that what they call?
Absolutely. The video game walkthroughs with no commentary. So it was just like you would actually see the video game without like the person actually there and talking about it.
Mhm. So somebody played the video game and posted that video on YouTube, and that's what you used to analyze your video games. So a second question then is, um, so yes, one of the things you mentioned was there are certain criteria that you had for inclusion into your sample. So you said they had to be best-selling, right? Franchises, right? So that was one of the inclusions. So, and by best, almost what we call most popular, you looked at their sales. Is that what?
So we not only looked at the sales, we looked at the critical receptions that they had when the video games came out. Where it's just like when you look at the franchises, let's for example, we look at the Grand Theft Auto franchise. It had over 3 billion sales throughout just in one game in and of itself. So you can imagine what the whole franchise was. So the numbers were very there in terms of sales, but as well as like when you were looking at the critical receptions, it was always like 80% and above.
Um, the second question then is, so did you mention that one of the research question was the change, how the themes in morality change over time in video games? That was one of the questions.
The questions were, do video games have more themes and more dilemmas? And if so, what most typical more themes and dilemmas in popular video games? Has there been a change in frequency in the types of more themes in video games from 1990 to 2019?
Right. So it was there essentially, did video games change in their, I guess, moral content? So that was so that's why you needed to address that specific question about the change in morality over time, you needed games from the 90s up to, so the two video games of different years, right? To see.
And the best part is the franchises where it's just like they would start in the 90s, but they would still continue. So it wasn't just like analyzing one video game and be like, hey, that was cool for that particular moment in time. But with the franchise, you could look at it across 3 decades for if we still were able to do a research today.
Right. So you could, the data really that you generated was not only just in general, what is there a change over time, but even with then you could look at a specific franchise and see if there's a change over time in that particular franchise. So that was interesting too.
Yeah.
Okay, so then another question to you is, what was your unit of coding? So another part of the methodology of content analysis is to develop or to come up with a unit of coding, the part that you will essentially code. And what was that unit of coding for you? Do you remember?
Yeah, the unit of coding for me was a specific instance where we see a moral theme in the video games. So basically, we're just like, if we were to pick a game like Uncharted and you see the main character, Drake, running around in a forest and basically everything around him being destroyed because he's being hunted by mercenaries, that's basically, you would code that as like recklessness right there because you just see nothing but chaos and disorder. So yeah, that would be my unit of coding.
Right, and one of the things you mentioned, right? So in another thing is you had to have you had categories of moral themes, right?
Yes.
And so the moral themes that you expected to observe, and so an example again, you gave one of the category was recklessness, right?
Yep.
It's when a protagonist or the character is acting recklessly. So it's actually funny. It's actually the opposite of morality, but it's still the moral theme. It's moral theme, but in this case, acting recklessly would be not moral. But as far as the theme, it is related to morality, I guess, right? So that was one of the categories. What was I don't know if do you remember what was the most common moral theme in in the video games? Do you remember that part? Or very free? Do you remember?
You said the most common moral themes, that would have to be duties.
Could you elaborate? What's that theme? What is it?
Well, yeah, duties would be more just like you're doing something as like it's your work or it's just like it's your code.
Oh.
Yeah, obligations. Yeah.
So you do something out of duty to either your country or your family. Is that what that would be considered? Yes,
duties and recklessness were the most prevalent moral themes.
So on one hand, you have what would be considered a moral act, right? You're acting as out of duty to your family, for example. But on the other hand, recklessness was another most common one, but you would call that an anti-moral act.
You mean, or an immoral act? Yeah.
But okay.
Balance of power.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess you could say that just by finding that, you could say that video games have both good and bad things, right? Going.
Absolutely.
What was the change over time that you found?
So it's interesting that you said that because in the change over times that we found throughout franchises was that causing harm, which is another more themes, and recklessness were going down as in a sense where like they were very prevalent in the 90s and they started to dwindle in the 2000s and they were almost non-existent in the 2010s. But what we did see was a rise in self-development and self-care from and self-respect from the 1990s going to the 2000s and rising up again in the 2010. So I think it was definitely a depiction of the times that we lived in, like the video games were mirroring that. So yeah, it was fun.
So in fact, there you could say that trend or that change is a positive change, right?
Absolutely.
So anything else that you found that was actually surprising to you personally? Was there anything
Oh,
that you found that was surprising to you personally?
yes, what I found what was surprising to me personally was that, hey, we have more themes, but look at this. We have something unique. We have this thing called a moral dilemma, which allows the user to actually make decisions. And in the moral dilemmas, it became more complicated as times go by. So it's like if you start first starting playing video game, we start at low levels and then we increase as time goes. But it's like there's more dilemmas. Says, hey, do you want something to drink or do you want to smoke? Yes or no. All right. Yes, all right, no consequences. But as time goes by, the more dilemmas became more explicit and more demanding and more task taking. Where it's like instead of just absolutely, instead of just like one more dilemma, it became you have 5 more dilemmas, and every single one of them took you to a whole different path, each of them having different consequences. So you really had to sit down. It wasn't no longer, hey, I'm watching a movie and I'm enjoying it, or hey, I'm just having a little fun with this video game. Now it's I have to sit down and I have to think, oof, like, am I okay with this decision going forward? Because you don't see the repercussions of the decision until you're like 20 levels ahead. And if you know as a gamer, being at least 20 levels ahead, you can't come back and restart and not make different decisions. Like it's hard and you have to live with that decision, and they have consequences to other moral dilemmas that you would have to face. So it was just like, holy cow. Yeah, this is getting interesting.
So it's clear that you mentioned you were also a gamer. So you have a little bit of a, I guess, personal interest in that, the study was. Do you remember how you just why you decided to even do this kind of project? I don't remember now. What was the?
No, I remember because that memory always sticks with me. And yeah, the first reason why I started to do this project is the first reason I did. Incidentally, I was in the research methods class, ladies and gentle people. And the project I did was content analysis of children media. And it was because I had a little brother that was actually watching children media. And in the same instance, as soon as I got done with that project, my little brother started becoming an age and wanted to play video games. And I was just like, I have this massive data right here. What can I do with it that could be fun and spontaneous? So every single time I see him, I'm like, you're the reason why I passed my research methods class. You're the reason why I have my senior thesis and I actually got into grad school. All right, good to know.
Wow, interesting. There was something else. Okay, so I had another question for you. So I asked you about the unit of coding, unit of so the unit of analysis, I remember what the unit of analysis, again, for my for a content analysis study, you have to have clear distinction. Okay, what is the unit of coding and what is your unit of analysis? The unit of analysis in your study was video games. So I remember that because the statistical analysis of your study was quite complicated, I have to say. And one of the reasons was because you have video games that are nested within franchises. So there's some dependency. So the actual statistical analysis was not so easy. And one thing I wanted to ask you was there what was the difficult part about the content analysis? And who helped you with the coding?
The most difficult part of the content analysis.
Do you remember? I know it's been a while, but do you remember what you struggled with the most?
I'm trying not to remember pain, but yes, let's go for it. The most difficult part of the content analysis was.
Do you remember? I remember
I remember who coded. I remember who helped me coding. There was 2 groups of people. Number one, it was definitely you helped a great deal, Dr. Klemenko. So all praises to you. And number 2 is I had my own lab which I assisted in, and I had students who were freshmen of different majors, and they actually helped me with coding video games because they too had passions of video games and they liked what I was doing. Yes.
Well, and some didn't have any clue about video games. So that was not a prerequisite for coding, right?
No, it was not a prerequisite, right. But as soon as they got done with the class, they definitely had a more well-rounded knowledge of video games.
Which we didn't, that wasn't our intention, but I guess they were. Okay,
yes.
But I remember now one of the difficult part, and this is also difficult for any content analysis, is to making sure that the coding scheme, the plan, the coding instructions are clear, but also reliable, meaning that if you coding and if somebody else is coding, you actually will see and code the same thing, or you code them similarly. So there shouldn't be a lot of disagreement in your codes.
Yes, I now remember now. Reliability coding was a pure terror in a sense of first we had to get the coding scheme correctly because it was just like we were just coming up and creating things that we could see individually and like it would work for us. But as soon as you have it in a lab and you bring it out to people, the first thing we got was, hey, constructive criticism. This code, we don't see it this way. We don't see it that way. It's just like now we had to find a whole new coding scheme. And as soon as we had coding scheme, it was just like I had to make sure that it was reliable. Like, okay, if these 2 or 3 people right here are in unanimous decision that they see this, can another 3 sets of people look at it and see the same thing? Or do they see something completely different, even though I'm giving them the same code? So it was very difficult. Yeah, but we got through it. What can I say, ladies and gentlemen? I didn't want to make this easy for me. So yeah.
Yes. So all of it was a lot of work, a lot of hard work. Okay, is there anything else you want to add? But this was very interesting, and the whole project was interesting, and we did discover. Interesting.
Yes. The whole project was life-changing for me. I don't think I would be where I am today if it wasn't for this project. And it took me basically to the moon and stars and back. So I definitely enjoyed it. But I could also say that there were times where it was just like, I was sitting down, I was just like, is this man, I don't know if this is gonna happen. Like, are we gonna get somewhere? And it's really hard at first because when you're creating something that no one has ever done before and you're moving to different directions, you're gonna get a lot of feedback, not most of it necessarily good, but in the same time, you just have to keep pushing forward. And then you have to try to create something of lasting value and try to see what their reactions are to what you already create. And incidentally, the same people that were giving me feedback also came back and says, oh, wow, like this is very interesting. We would like to be a part of it. So, just stick through it and don't be a perfectionist. Perfectionist is where creativity dies. So just enjoy the process and enjoy the failures that you're going to experience because you will fail at times when it comes to creating a thesis or a dissertation.
That's true. Thank you. And on that note, we can finish our conversation. Again, thank you very much to you.
Absolutely.